I want to try something a little different to start today.
Okay.
I want to run a simulation with you. I want you, if you can, just close your eyes for a second. Obviously, if you're driving, please keep them on the road.
Yes, please do.
But if you can, just close them. Imagine it's tomorrow morning. It's a Tuesday. The alarm goes off at, say, 6:30, just like it always does. You hit snooze. It feels like, every other Tuesday you've ever lived.
The coffee is brewing, the sun is coming through the blinds.
Yeah.
Just a standard operating procedure.
Right. It's mundane. It's completely normal. But then you pick up your phone. You do the morning doom scroll, Instagram, email, the weather.
The usual.
And then you see a notification from your news app. But it's not the usual political noise or celebrity gossip. It's a red banner. And the headline is just 3 words: dollar peg breaks.
And for, I'd say, 99% of people, that headline is confusing before it's scary. You might think, is that a typo? Did the app glitch? What does that even mean?
Exactly. Your brain just kind of rejects it. You think, okay, markets are weird, whatever. You go to the kitchen to pour that coffee, but then you get an alert from your bank.
Uh-oh.
You open the app and you see your savings account. The number's the same. The digits haven't changed. But then you go to buy your morning latte on the way to work. And yesterday it was, what, $5.50?
And something like that.
Today, the screen says $9.
That is the moment. That's when the abstraction becomes very, very real. That sinking feeling in your stomach.
Yeah.
That isn't economic anxiety. That is a survival instinct kicking in.
You drive past the gas station, and the digital sign is just flickering. They're trying to update the numbers, but they're going up while you're just sitting there at the red light. You realize that the safety you thought you had in your bank account has evaporated overnight.
And not because the money is gone.
No, but because the money just doesn't work the way it did yesterday.
And this is the scenario we really need to confront. I know it's uncomfortable, it's visceral, but it's the core of what we're digging into today.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we are unpacking a source that is, I'll admit, a little unsettling, but incredibly important. It's a document titled The Silent Shift: China and the Psychology of Dollar Collapse. And look, I'll be honest with you. When I first read that title, I rolled my eyes a little bit. I thought, okay, here we go. Here comes the doom-mongering. Buy gold, hide in a bunker. The sky is falling.
It does have that end is nigh flavor to the title, doesn't it? We see a lot of that in the financial space.
We do, yeah.
Yeah.
But once we actually dove into the material, this wasn't about bunkers. It wasn't about the apocalypse.
Yeah.
It was about something much quieter and, frankly, much more interesting. It's about belief.
That is the key word here. That's everything. We tend to think of money as math. We think it's a constant like gravity or, physics. But this source argues that the U.S. dollar isn't physics.
Right.
It's a story. It's a story we've all agreed to tell each other for the last, 80 years? And the mission of this deep dive is to ask, what happens when the audience stops believing in the story?
The source puts it really bluntly. It says, this isn't a movie plot. And it isn't paranoia. This is how power actually changes hands.
Right.
It's not through violence. It's through the erosion of trust.
And that's the distinction we really need to make right up front. We are conditioned by Hollywood to expect a collapse to be an explosion.
Yeah.
An emergency broadcast. Aliens landing on the White House lawn.
Something loud.
Something loud. But the expert analysis here points to a silent shift. The central thesis is that the most dangerous changes are the ones that arrive quietly, settle in, and rearrange the furniture before anyone even notices they're in the room.
It's the old boiling frog analogy, isn't it? But applied to the entire global economy.
In a way, yes, but I think it's even deeper than just getting used to the heat. It's about the very foundation of our reality. I mean, think about it. The world runs on a single, massive assumption, a belief.
Right.
The belief that the United States dollar will be worth something tomorrow. Over 90% of global trade relies on that one belief.
Yeah. 90%. That number is just, it's staggering when you really stop to think about what that means.
It is the operating system of the planet. Oil is priced in dollars. National debts are denominated in dollars. Your retirement fund, if you're listening in the West, is almost certainly tied to the dollar.
We don't even notice it.
No, because it's like air. You don't notice the air until the room starts running out of oxygen. Today, we're going to look at what happens when the oxygen levels start to drop. Not because of a war, but because of a quiet psychological strategy.
So let's get into section 1 here, the psychology of belief. Because this is the foundation of everything else. If we don't get our heads around the psychology, the rest is just, numbers on a screen.
Right.
The source makes this fascinating point that the global economy is basically a confidence game.
It absolutely is. And I don't mean con game in the, let's say, criminal sense, although I'm sure some would argue that point.
Sure, yeah.
I mean it in the literal sense of the word. It runs on confidence, trust. And the source points out that trust is, well, incredibly fragile. It doesn't require massive proof to break it.
No.
It just requires doubt.
There's a line in the text that really stuck with me. Doubt spreads faster than facts.
It's so true. Just think about a classic bank run. If you hear a rumor, just a rumor, that your bank might be insolvent, do you wait for the quarterly audit report to come out?
No way.
Do you wait for the CEO to issue a carefully worded press statement?
No. I get in my car and I go get my cash. Right now.
Exactly. You act on the doubt. And because everyone acts on the doubt, the bank actually does fail. The doubt creates the reality. That is how sensitive this entire system is.
And the uncomfortable truth, which the source really highlights, is that the United States needs this trust more than anyone.
More than anyone, by far.
Okay, let's unpack that. I want to stop on this concept of the U.S. needing trust. The source mentions something called exporting inflation. I feel like that's a phrase people hear on financial news channels.
All the time.
But they don't really grasp the magnitude of it. It sounds like, I don't know, a shipping container full of bad balloons or something.
Yeah.
How do you export a price hike?
It's a bit of a magic trick, and it's absolutely crucial to understanding why the dollar is under threat. So let's strip away the economics jargon for a second.
Please.
Imagine we are at a massive house party. The whole world is invited, and the United States is the host.
Okay, I'm at the party. I'm picturing it.
Mm-hmm.
Bad music, probably.
Probably. Now, to buy a drink or get a snack at this party, you have to use special tickets. You can't use cash, you can't use IOUs, you have to use dollar tickets.
Okay.
And guess who owns the only ticket printer in the entire house?
The host. The U.S.
Right. Now, imagine the host decides they want a new sports car, or they want to fund a war, or maybe they just want to renovate the kitchen. They don't have the tickets saved up.
Oh.
So what do? They just go into the back room, press a button, and print a massive stack of brand new tickets.
Okay, but in a normal economy, if you print too much money, the value goes down. That's inflation 101. If everyone suddenly has 1 million tickets, a drink is going to cost 1 million tickets.
Exactly right. If the host only gave those newly printed tickets to his own family living in the house, the prices inside the house would skyrocket immediately.
Yeah.
But here's the trick. It's what's called the exorbitant privilege. That's the actual economic term for it.
Wow.
The host takes those freshly printed tickets and sends them out of the house. He uses them to buy real things, TVs from Japan, oil from Saudi Arabia, coffee from Brazil.
So the new money, it leaves the building.
Precisely. The inflation, the dilution of value gets spread out over the entire world. The U.S. gets the stuff, the real goods, the TVs, the oil, and the rest of the world gets left holding the paper.
Wait a second, let me play devil's advocate here. Why would the rest of the world agree to this? If I'm Brazil and I see the U.S. is just printing money out of thin air to pay me for my coffee beans, why do I accept it? It sounds like a terrible deal on my end.
That is the trillion-dollar question. And for decades, the answer was pretty simple. Where else are you going to go?
Right. It was the only game in town.
It was the only game in town. The U.S. party was the safest, fanciest party. The U.S. economy was the engine of the world. The U.S. military secured the global trade routes. It was a trade-off. We give you stability and access to the biggest market, and in return, you accept our inflation. You hold our dollars because they are the safest asset on Earth.
But now, the source is suggesting that the why question is breaking that deal.
Yes. Because if the host starts getting reckless with the printer, or if the host starts kicking people out of the party arbitrarily, which is what sanctions are, then the guests start looking around for a different party.
Or they start thinking about printing their own tickets.
Or they start printing their own tickets. And this leads us directly to what the source calls the dangerous question. It says, policymakers fear one specific question more than any other. Why?
It's such a simple question, but it just dissolves the magic trick, doesn't it?
It does. Why? Why does one country get to print the money that everyone else depends on? Why should the savings of a shopkeeper in Brazil or a manufacturer in Germany depend on decisions made by the Federal Reserve in Washington, D.C.?
And the political angle, too. Why should global trade be so vulnerable to U.S. sanctions? If I'm a country that has a political disagreement with the U.S., suddenly my ability to buy medicine or sell my oil is completely cut off because all the plumbing of the financial world runs through New York.
Exactly. And the source makes a key point here. This questioning didn't start in Washington. It started in Beijing. And this is where the psychology of this whole thing shifts from how the system works to how the system is being, well, dismantled.
This brings us to Section 2. China's silent strategy. And I love the contrast the source draws here. We're used to thinking of geopolitical conflict as loud. You know, threats, aircraft carriers, angry speeches at the UN.
Full of noise.
A lot of noise. But the source says China took a totally different approach.
Silence versus noise. That's the framework it uses. The source argues that China realized something really profound. Shouting triggers resistance. If you stand up and scream, "I'm going to destroy the dollar," what happens?
Everyone circles the wagons, the U.S. pushes back, all its allies get nervous and rally around it.
Right. But silence. Silence triggers complacency. Correct. If you do it quietly, nobody feels the urgent need to stop you until it's already too late. And the catalyst for this, according to the source, was China watching very, very closely what happened to Russia and Iran.
Right, seeing them get cut off from the SWIFT system, I didn't realize how pivotal that moment was for China psychologically.
It was a massive wake-up call when the U.S. effectively kicked Russia out of SWIFT.
Pause there for a second. We say SWIFT all the time in these conversations.
Yeah.
Can you just quickly define what that actually is? Is it a bank? Is it some kind of government agency?
That's a great question because it's a bit of a black box for most people. No, SWIFT isn't a bank. The simplest way to think about it is, it's a messaging app. It's like WhatsApp for giant international banks.
Okay, a chat room for money.
Pretty much. If a bank in New York wants to send $1 million to a bank in Tokyo, Bank A has to send a secure message to Bank B saying, hey, move the money from this account to that account. SWIFT is this secure chat room where those messages happen.
And the U.S. controls the moderator privileges on the chat room?
Effectively, yes. It's based in Belgium, but the U.S. has enormous influence. Yeah. So when Russia invaded Ukraine, the U.S. and its allies didn't just sanction them, they kicked them out of the chat room.
Wow.
And suddenly Russia couldn't easily sell its oil or buy essential goods because they couldn't send the message to move the money.
And China's watching this happen.
China's watching this and thinking, we are next. They realize that as long as they rely on SWIFT, the U.S. has a kill switch for their entire economy. The psychological impact wasn't just on Russia, it was on everyone watching.
Right.
China looked at that and realized it could happen to us. Fear doesn't come from the event itself. It comes from the realization of your own vulnerability.
So China is sitting there with all this leverage on paper, you know, the factories, the workers, the technology, but psychologically they were completely dependent on the dollar. And dependency creates resentment.
And resentment, when it's channeled correctly, creates very long-term planning. The source describes China's move as removing emotion from the equation entirely. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about a big confrontation.
No.
It was about preparation. They started asking that dangerous question, but to themselves. What if we don't need the dollar at all?
And the answer wasn't one big thing. It was 1,000 small things. The source lists them. Quiet trade deals settled in local currencies. Buying gold.
The gold is a huge psychological signal. We've seen central banks, particularly China's, just stacking gold reserves year after year after year.
But isn't gold kind of, I don't know, archaic? It feels like we're going back to the Stone Age, or at least the 19th century. We live in a digital world. Why is a high-tech superpower like China buying these heavy bars of metal?
Because psychologically, it's actually the most advanced move on the board. Gold is the only financial asset on the planet that is not someone else's liability.
What do you mean by that?
Well, if you hold a U.S. Treasury bond, that is a promise from the U.S. government to pay you back. If the U.S. government collapses or just decides not to pay, that bond is just a piece of paper.
It relies on trust.
It relies on trust. Gold is gold. It doesn't need a promise from anyone. It doesn't need a counterparty. It has inherent value that's been recognized for thousands of years.
It's trustless.
It's the ultimate trustless asset. By stacking gold, China is building a foundation of value that stands completely outside the U.S. system. It's a hedge against the collapse of the story of the dollar. It's a very loud but silent signal that says we are preparing for a world where paper promises might not hold up.
And then there's the technology aspect. Building a payment system outside of U.S. control and, of course, a digital currency. The source mentions CIPS.
Yes. CIPS, that's the cross-border interbank payment system. If SWIFT is WhatsApp, then CIPS is the alternative messaging app that China built from the ground up. It's their own set of phone lines.
So if the U.S. cuts their line.
They just switch phones. No, to be clear, it's not as big or as widely used as SWIFT yet, not even close. But it exists, and the mere fact that it exists changes the entire psychology of the game.
How so?
It means the nuclear option of financial sanctions isn't really nuclear anymore. It's just very inconvenient.
Mm.
The threat loses its existential power.
The source calls this the $5 trillion shift. It's the movement of trade, reserves, and settlements away from the dollar. And the result is this subconscious message that starts to spread globally. The dollar is optional now.
That is the pivotal psychological moment. That's the crack in the foundation. Once something is optional, it becomes replaceable.
It's no longer the default.
Exactly. You don't have to use it. And if you don't have to use it, the exorbitant privilege of the U.S. starts to, well, evaporate.
I think this is a good place to transition to the mechanics of how this actually plays out. Because in movies, a collapse is always this big, sudden event. You know, the stock market crashes, people are running in the streets, papers are flying everywhere.
Right.
But Section 3 of our source material calls it an erosion process.
Yeah, and we have a very strong Hollywood bias when it comes to disaster. We expect explosions, we expect a countdown clock on a big red screen, but real system collapses, whether it's a currency or a civilization, are usually slow until they suddenly aren't.
Slow until they suddenly aren't. That is a terrifying phrase.
It is. It's the old Hemingway line about how you go bankrupt. 2 ways, gradually then suddenly. The source describes it as an erosion. Think about a massive concrete dam holding back a river. That dam is the belief in the dollar. Now imagine a tiny crack appears.
Just a hairline fracture. You can barely see it.
Water trickles through. It's nothing. The engineers, they ignore it. It's just a little leak, they say. The structure is sound. Then another crack appears on the other side. Maybe Saudi Arabia decides to sell some oil to China in yuan instead of dollars. That's a crack.
It's just one deal.
Just one deal. Then Brazil and Argentina start talking about a common currency for their bilateral trade. That's another crack. Then a central bank in Africa quietly decides to hold more gold and fewer dollars in its reserves. Another tiny crack.
And none of these things destroy the dam on their own. They're just news headlines you scroll past.
Exactly. The dam still looks solid from a distance. The tourists, that's the general public, are still taking pictures of it, thinking it's eternal. But structurally, the integrity is gone. The water pressure, the market forces is searching for every single weakness.
And then comes the suddenly.
The suddenly is the breach. Maybe it's a bad economic report out of the U.S. Maybe it's a geopolitical crisis somewhere. Something pushes against that weakened dam, and instead of holding, it just crumbles, and that's when the flood happens.
That's the hyperinflation, the market panic.
That's the panic. But the collapse didn't happen in that moment. The collapse happened during the 10 years of ignored cracks.
That's terrifying because it implies we are living through the collapse right now. We just haven't hit the suddenly part yet.
That is precisely the argument the source is making. We are in the erosion phase, and because it's erosion, it's silent. You don't hear concrete eroding. You only hear the dam breaking.
And this brings us right back to the core theme. Math versus psychology. The source has this quote that I just can't shake. Currencies don't die because of math. They die because of psychology. I want to dig into that because we always hear about debt to GDP ratios and interest rate spreads. That's all math. So why does psychology trump the math?
Because math is static, but psychology is dynamic. It's fluid. You can have absolutely terrible math, huge national debt, bad trade deficits, and your currency can survive for decades if people believe in it. I mean, look at the U.S. right now. The math is, let's just say, it's challenging. National debt is skyrocketing, but the belief holds it all up. However, once that trust is shaken, the math doesn't matter anymore. People just start to protect themselves.
Self-preservation kicks in. It's primal.
Exactly. And when one person protects themselves by moving out of the dollar, that's just a data point. When 1 million people do it, that's a movement. When an entire nation does it, that's momentum. And as the source says, momentum does not ask for permission.
It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
It is the ultimate self-fulfilling prophecy. If everyone thinks the dollar is going to fall, they sell the dollar. And because they all sell the dollar
falls.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Psychology becomes reality.
So, okay, let's bring this down to the ground level. We've been talking about nations and central banks and massive concrete dams, but Section 4 of our outline is the impact on you, the listener.
Right.
Because if this system changes, it's not just lines on a chart changing, it's our actual lives.
This is the part that is uncomfortable but absolutely necessary to talk about. The source asks, if this system changes, where does that leave you? Your savings, your job, your family's future. We have to move from the abstract to the very concrete.
The source describes the signs in daily life, and it goes right back to that opening visualization we did. It mentions the concept of loss aversion.
Loss aversion is such a powerful psychological force. Behavioral economists have shown we are wired to fear losing $100 far more than we value gaining $100.
It's an irrational fear, almost.
It's an evolutionary survival instinct. So when this shift starts to touch our daily lives, our brains react with stress signals long before we consciously understand the economics behind it.
What are those signs? The source lists things like gas prices just ticking higher. Not a huge spike, just a steady, relentless tick upward. Groceries costing a little more every single week.
It's the invisible chaos, or the invisible tax. You get a notice from the bank that interest rates are rising, so your variable mortgage payment just went up by $100 a month. You see your parents hesitating at the checkout line at the grocery store.
Hey.
Teenagers noticing their parents counting bills twice before paying for something. These are small, intimate, personal moments of stress.
It's the atmosphere of the household that changes.
Precisely. The nervous system senses danger. It's like animals sensing an earthquake before it hits. The source mentions that these whispers of uncertainty trigger stress hormones. We become more reactive, more anxious, less likely to spend, more likely to hoard.
I want to talk about shrinkflation, too, because that feels like a big part of this silent erosion we're talking about.
Oh, absolutely. That is the perfect example of the silent shift in action. The bag of chips is the same price it was last year, but you open it, and there are 5 fewer chips in the bag.
Right. The cereal box is the same height on the shelf, but you pick it up, and it's thinner.
It's the currency losing its power, but companies are trying to hide it in plain sight.
They're hiding the inflation from you.
Exactly. They're trying not to spook you so you don't panic, but you feel it, you know you're getting less, you know your money is going less far, and that breeds this low-level cynicism and anxiety that just permeates society.
And then you look at the macro level, the stock market floor. The source describes it as red numbers everywhere, tense murmurs, the dollar itself feeling fragile.
And the economic impact just cascades from there. Families spend less, so businesses make less revenue. Credit card usage drops because people are suddenly terrified of taking on new debt.
Right.
Investments just freeze because nobody knows what the currency will be worth in 5 years, let alone 5 months.
Businesses relying on cheap imports from overseas, they must feel the strain immediately.
That's a huge one. If the dollar weakens, everything we buy from other countries, which is a lot of what we consume, becomes more expensive. So local jobs that depend on that global supply chain start to feel very, very unstable. It's a vicious cycle.
But there's a twist here. The source calls it the human twist. While some parts of the world might be panicking, other nations, the ones who have adopted this new system the source talks about, they might actually be feeling relief.
That's the relativity of it all. Fear and security are completely driven by perception. If you are in a country that has been diversifying away from the dollar, maybe into gold or using the digital yuan for trade, you might look at the falling dollar and think, thank goodness we prepared. The chaos isn't evenly distributed. One person's crisis is another person's validation.
This leads us perfectly into Section 5, the psychology of survival. Because if human nature creates this storm, then understanding human nature is also the way to navigate through it.
Yes. The source analyzes why this silent war is so effective. It's because it exploits our deep-seated hatred of uncertainty. Humans crave control, and when we feel powerless, we make rushed, emotional decisions.
We panic sell.
We panic sell, we panic buy things we don't need, we freeze and do nothing, which is also a decision.
So how do we move from being a victim of this psychology to being a survivor? The source actually offers some specific, actionable steps.
It does, and the first step is by far the most important. Understand the forces. You have to acknowledge that the shift is happening. Denial is your worst enemy.
It's easy to fall into that trap.
It is. If you just pretend the dollar is invincible because it always has been in your lifetime, you are willfully ignoring the data. You have to admit that the dam has cracks. That's step 1.
Step 2, separate emotion from action. That sounds like great advice for a Vulcan. But for a human being watching their life savings evaporate, that feels impossible.
It is incredibly difficult, and evolution works directly against us here. When our ancestors heard a twig snap in the forest, the ones who ran immediately survived.
Right.
The ones who stopped to logically analyze the source of the sound, they got eaten. We are bred to panic first and think later.
So panic is actually a survival mechanism.
In nature, yes. In financial markets, it's a death sentence. When the herd panics, they sell at the bottom, they buy at the top. They do the exact opposite of what logic dictates. And the silent war strategy, it counts on that. It counts on the West panicking.
So how do you override millions of years of evolution?
You use systems. That's what separate emotion from action really means. It means you don't decide what to do during the crisis. You decide now, while things are relatively calm.
I'll make a plan.
You make a plan. If X happens, I will do Y. You pre-program your response. You have to act like a pilot.
A pilot?
Pilots don't try to figure out what to do when the engine fails while they are plummeting toward the ground. They have a checklist. They have trained for it over and over. Engine failure, step 1, step 2, step 3. They don't scream. They execute the plan. We have to have a financial checklist.
And step 3 in our checklist is diversify assets. The source specifically warns against relying on a single currency.
This is the financial equivalent of the old saying, don't put all your eggs in one basket. If your house, your income, your savings, and your investments are all 100% tied to the US dollar,
Which they are for most people listening.
then you are all in on the dollar. You've made a massive concentrated bet.
Which is fine if the dollar is strong and stable.
But if the dollar is the very thing being attacked, you have no lifeboat. Diversifying just means having some assets that zag when the dollar zigs. Maybe that's some international stocks. Maybe it's commodities. Maybe it's a piece of real estate. It's about spreading the risk so that if the dam does break, you have a raft ready to go.
And step 4, observe trends logically. This goes back to the media and the headlines.
It does. The headlines are designed to trigger emotion. Crash. Doom. All-time high. They are clickbait for your amygdala, your fear center. Observing logically means looking past the headlines to the underlying fundamentals. You have to watch the flows of money, not the flows of words.
Watch what they do, not what they say.
Always. Watch what the world's central banks are buying. Are they buying US dollars? Or are they quietly buying gold? Watch where the big trade deals are going. Are they being settled in dollars? Or are they being settled in yuan or rupees? Those are the signals that actually matter.
The source emphasizes that feeling late or powerless is a natural reaction. I think a lot of people feel that way when they hear this stuff. They think, why didn't I know this sooner? It's too late for me.
It's a very natural reaction. But the source makes the point that knowledge changes everything. The shift is now visible. The $5 trillion plan we talked about, the digital yuan, the gold reserves, the bypass payment systems. It's operational now. It's not a theory anymore.
So the choice is understand the psychology and try to survive, or ignore it and get left behind.
That's the stark reality of it, yes.
I want to revisit the image of the silent shift one more time before we close. The source describes a subconscious message spreading globally. That feels almost like the movie Inception, like an idea being planted in the world's mind.
It is viral in the truest sense of the word. Ideas are viruses. The idea that the dollar is invincible was a virus that infected the world for 80 years, and for a long time, it created stability.
Sure.
Now, a new virus is spreading. The dollar is optional.
And you can't really vaccinate against an idea once it takes root.
Not easily. And what's so fascinating is how this plays out in negotiations that we, the public, never get to see. Imagine a trade meeting between Brazil and China. 10 years ago, the question of what currency do we use wouldn't even be asked.
It was the dollar. Default setting.
Default. Now, a Chinese diplomat might gently suggest, why should we pay the conversion fees to dollars? Why risk the exchange rate fluctuation? Let's just swap yuan for real directly. It's a rational, logical suggestion.
And it saves them both money.
And every time a country says yes to that, the dollar dies a little bit. Not with a bang, but with a signature on a trade agreement.
It's death by 1,000 signatures?
And this brings us right back to the listener. Why does this matter to the person driving to work right now? Because that death by 1,000 signatures eventually shows up as death by 1,000 price hikes at their local supermarket.
That's the connection. The geopolitical is personal.
It is. We like to think we are insulated from these massive global shifts. We think, I just live in Ohio. What does a trade deal in Beijing have to do with me? The answer is everything. The value of the money in your pocket is determined by those deals.
So when we ask the listener to listen for the whisper, we're really asking them to pay attention to the value of their own labor. Because that's what money is, at the end of the day, right? Stored labor.
That is beautifully put. Money is your time, your energy stored in a battery. If that battery is leaking value because of these global shifts, your time is effectively being stolen from you. The silent shift is, in effect, a silent theft of value from those who aren't paying attention.
That is heavy. But it's also empowering in a way, because if you know the battery is leaking, you can move the energy somewhere else.
Exactly. You become active, not passive.
Mhm.
You move from being a victim to being a survivor. And that is the ultimate goal of understanding all this psychology.
Let's wrap this up then. We've covered a lot of ground today.
Yeah.
We started with that unsettling feeling of waking up to a new reality, the red banner on the phone, the price of coffee suddenly doubling.
Hmm.
We traced that feeling all the way back to the psychology of belief that holds the dollar up and how fragile that belief actually is.
We looked at China's strategy of silence, that noise versus silence concept, how they're building parallel systems like CIPS and stacking gold to create a sort of fire exit from the dollar system.
And we talked about the mechanics of collapse, the dam with the cracks, that slow erosion process, and finally how this impacts us personally and what we can actually do about it. The pilot checklist. Understand, separate emotion, diversify, and observe.
At the end of the day, this wasn't a story about a war fought with missiles or tanks. It was a story about a war fought with perception, with trust, and with human behavior. And the reality is, the dollar is losing its grip. Not suddenly, but unmistakably.
It's a sobering thought.
Hmm.
But you mentioned earlier that we shouldn't feel powerless.
No, absolutely not. You can't control the global system. You can't call up the Federal Reserve and tell them to stop printing money.
Yeah.
You can't call Beijing and tell them to stop buying gold. You can't predict every single ripple in the pond.
But you can control how you react.
You can educate yourself. You can adapt. You can choose not to be the person who wakes up surprised on that Tuesday morning. You can be the person who sees that headline and says, okay, I knew this was coming. I have a plan.
I want to leave the listener with this final provocative thought from the source. It's something that I think will stick with me for a long, long time. Power doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers and reshapes the world quietly.
The question is, are you listening closely enough to hear the whisper before it becomes a scream?
That's where we'll leave it for today. Thanks for listening to The Deep Dive.
Stay curious and stay prepared.
We'll see you next time.